A wooden crutch thudded once on the tile floor of the back room. 6 men stopped chewing. A fork froze halfway to her mouth. The kitchen door swung shut behind her with a soft slap of rubber. She took one more step on the crutch and one more step on the foot she still had, and the empty pant leg swung where the other leg used to be. Nobody spoke. A glass of red wine sat half full at the head of the long table. The old man at the head of that table set his bread down on his plate and looked up. She lowered herself onto her one knee right at the edge of his white tablecloth. She did not ask for mercy. She did not ask for money. She asked for a loaf of bread. Why would she walk in here for that? Stay with me on this one. Her name was Rosa Maria de Luca. She was 47 years old. She had been a wife for 26 of those years, and a widow for exactly 9 months and 4 days. She had lost the leg 3 months before she lost the husband. A delivery truck took the leg. A loan shark took the husband. The neighborhood knew both stories and pretended to know neither. Rosa lived in a third-floor walk-up on Bay 23rd Street in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. The stairs were her enemy now. Every morning she put her foot down on the first step and counted. 26 steps from her door to the street. She used the count to stop herself from crying. Counting was a job. Crying was a luxury she did not have. Her husband Tony had been a fishmonger. Not a big man, not a small man. The kind of man who whistled when he scraped scales. He had a shop on Cropsey Avenue with a green awning and a chalkboard out front that listed the catch of the day in Tony's slow, careful handwriting. Cod, bluefish, smelt, sometimes a striped bass if the weather had been kind. He opened the shop at 6 in the morning and he closed it at 7 at night, and he gave the bones to the cats in the alley behind the laundromat. Old women bought from him because he never short-weighted them. Young husbands bought from him because he taught them how to clean a fish without ruining it. He was the kind of man you do not notice you love until he is gone. He borrowed $8,000 from a man named Carmine Falco to keep the shop open after the truck accident, because the medical bills came in like waves and the insurance came in like a leaking faucet. Carmine Falco was not a banker. Carmine Falco was a loan shark who worked out of a social club 2 blocks from the fish market. He charged 5 points a week, which means $400 a week on top of the $8,000 every Friday in cash. Tony paid for 14 weeks. Then he missed one. The night he missed it, 3 men came to the shop. They broke his right hand, which was the hand he gutted fish with. They broke a window. They told him the $8,000 was now 12. The next Friday Tony paid $500. The Friday after that he paid $400. The Friday after that he did not come home at all. They found him in the trunk of his own truck, parked in the long-term lot at Kennedy Airport 4 days later. The police called it gang activity. The neighborhood called it Carmine Falco. Rosa called it the end of the only good thing in her life. The funeral was small. Tony's brother sent flowers from Florida and did not come. Rosa's sister sent a card. The neighborhood priest gave a sermon about the patience of widows and the long memory of God. Rosa sat in the front pew and did not cry. She had used up her crying when she lost the leg. She had nothing left to spend. After the funeral, she went home to the walk-up and ate a piece of dry toast and went to bed in her clothes. She slept for 13 hours. When she woke up, she found the silver medallion in the bottom of her late mother's jewelry box. The medallion was the size of a nickel. It was old. The silver had gone dark around the edges, where 40 years of skin and sweat and prayer had worn into it. On one side was a saint she did not recognize, a woman in robes holding a small basket. On the other side were 3 words in Italian, scratched in by hand, with what looked like the point of a small knife. Per la coraggio. For the courage. Her mother had told her the story once, when Rosa was 9 years old and frightened of a thunderstorm. A long time ago, on a cold night, Rosa's mother had pulled a young man out of a burning car on a road outside Naples. The young man's brother had given her this medallion as a thank you. He had said, "If you ever need anything from my family, anywhere in the world, show this. We pay our debts." Rosa's mother had laughed and put it in the jewelry box, and Rosa had laughed too, because they were poor people in Brooklyn, and what use was an old coin from Italy? Rosa held the medallion now and did not laugh. The next morning she put it around her neck on a thin steel chain. She did not know yet what she was going to do with it. She only knew that Carmen Falco was still walking around. He still ate at Vincenzo's on 18th Avenue every Tuesday. He still drove a black Cadillac that he parked across 2 spaces. He still bought espresso at the cafe on the corner of Bay Parkway and waved at children. The neighborhood let him. The police let him. And Rosa, balancing on one leg over the kitchen sink, decided that she would not let him. She did not own a gun. She would not have known how to use one if she did. What she owned was a crutch, a medallion, and a story her mother had told her 38 years ago. She owned the address of a restaurant called Marconi's, 3 blocks from the fish market, where the old men ate Sunday dinner in a private back room. She had walked past Marconi's 1,000 times. She had never gone inside. Today was Sunday. Today she was going to. She left the apartment at 4 in the afternoon, in a black dress and a black coat and a black scarf, with the medallion tucked inside her collar. She locked the door twice. She fed the cat. She put her wedding ring on the kitchen table because she did not want to wear it where she was going. She took the bus. The bus driver lowered the lift for her and did not look her in the eye, because in Bensonhurst even bus drivers know the difference between a woman who has lost a leg and a woman who has lost more than that. She got off at the corner. She crossed the street on her crutch and did not look at the cars. She pushed open the front door of Marconi's and the bell jingled, and a waiter in a black vest looked up, and his face went still. He knew who she was. The whole neighborhood knew. He did not speak. She did not speak. She crossed the dining room on the crutch. The other customers stopped eating. She walked to the back. She pushed open the swinging door to the private room. And that is where we came in, with the crutch thudding on the tile and the fork frozen in the air, and the Don of the Marconi family setting his bread down on his plate. The Don was a man in his late 70s. White hair combed back. Heavy shoulders. A thick neck. A scar on the knuckle of his right hand from something nobody asked about anymore. His name was Salvatore Marconi, but nobody in that room called him Salvatore. They called him Don Sal, or they called him nothing at all. He had run the borough for 31 years. He had buried 2 brothers, 1 wife and 1 son. The son had been a heroin addict and had died in a hotel in Atlantic City, and the Don had wept for 1 night and then never mentioned him again. The men at the table were his soldiers, his consigliere, his nephew, and 2 visiting captains from Staten Island. They were eating veal. They had been laughing about a horse race a moment ago. They were not laughing now. Rosa knelt at the edge of the white tablecloth. Her crutch lay flat on the floor beside her. Her one remaining knee took the weight of her whole body, and the edge of the table pressed against her sternum. She looked up at the Don. She did not look at the soldiers. She did not look at the consigliere. She looked only at the Don. She said 1 sentence. She said, "Senor, I came to ask for a loaf of bread." Nothing more. The nephew laughed. He was 26 years old and stupid. He said, "Get this cripple out of here." 2 of the soldiers stood up. The consigliere reached for his napkin. The Don did not move. The Don looked at Rosa, and Rosa looked at the Don, and the silence stretched out for what felt like a long time but was probably only 4 seconds. Then the Don raised his right hand. The 2 soldiers who had stood up sat back down. The nephew stopped laughing. The Don said, "Nobody touches this woman." The Don said it quietly. He did not need to say it twice. He said to Rosa, "Why do you ask for bread in my restaurant when there is a bakery on every corner of this neighborhood?" He spoke the way an old man speaks to a child he does not know. Polite. Curious. Not yet kind. Rosa swallowed. She reached up to her collar with her one hand. She pulled the chain out of her dress. The medallion swung once in the light of the chandelier. The Don saw it. The Don saw it, and the color drained out of his face the way wine drains out of a tipped glass. He stood up. He stood up slowly because he was old, but he stood up all the way. He walked around the long table. The soldiers watched him and did not move and did not breathe. He stopped in front of Rosa. He reached down with his big scarred hand and lifted the medallion off her chest. Just the medallion, not the chain, just the small silver weight of it on his palm. He turned it over. He read the 3 scratched words on the back. Per la coraggio. He closed his hand around it. He closed his eyes. He stood there for a long moment with his eyes closed in the middle of the back room of his own restaurant, and his men watched their Don in a way they had never watched him before. He opened his eyes. He looked down at Rosa. He said, "What was your mother's name?" Rosa said Anna. Anna Marie Russo, before she married. The Don nodded once. The Don said, in 1963, on a road outside the village of Pomigliano, my brother Vincenzo was in a car accident. The car was burning. He could not get out. A girl pulled him through the window. She tore her own dress to put out the fire on his chest. He gave her the medallion and he told her, if you ever need anything from a Marconi, anywhere, show this. She was 16 years old. She was your mother. You are her daughter. The Don said all of this without raising his voice. Then he said, stand up. Rosa shook her head. She said, I cannot stand up by myself anymore, senor. The Don reached down with both hands. He lifted her from the floor the way a father lifts a child. He set her in his own chair at the head of the table. He picked up the linen napkin from his own plate and shook it out and laid it across her lap. He turned to the table. He said, you will all eat with this woman tonight. You will treat her as you treat my own mother. Anyone who does not understand may leave the room now. Nobody left. If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want more of these stories from the back rooms where the real bills get paid. Stay with me. Because Rosa came here for a loaf of bread, and the Don has not given it to her yet, and there is still the matter of the man who killed her husband, and the Don has not even heard that part of the story yet, and Rosa is about to tell him. She ate slowly. The veal was tender. The bread was warm. The wine was something old that the Don poured for her with his own hand. The soldiers ate without speaking. The nephew kept his eyes on his plate. Nobody made a joke. Nobody mentioned the empty pant leg pinned up at the knee. When the plates were cleared, the Don leaned back in the chair next to her, the chair the consigliere had moved over for him, and he said, now tell me what you really came for. Because a woman does not climb the stairs of a Brooklyn walk-up on one leg and ride a bus across 3 neighborhoods on a Sunday afternoon to ask for a loaf of bread. Tell me, daughter of Anna. Rosa told him. She told him about Tony. She told him about the fish shop and the truck accident and the medical bills and the leaking insurance. She told him about Carmen Falco and the 5 points a week and the broken hand and the trunk at Kennedy Airport. She told him the police called it gang activity. She told him she did not come for revenge. She came because the bakery on her corner had raised the price of a loaf to $4.75, and she could not afford it anymore. She came for bread. The rest was just a story she carried around inside her chest. The Don listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod. He sat the way a judge sits. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long time. The candles on the table burned down a little. Then he turned his head slowly, and he looked at the consigliere. The consigliere was a thin man named Frank Pizzo, who had been with the Don for 30 years. The Don said, Frank. The consigliere said, yes, Padrone. The Don said, who does Carmen Falco answer to? The consigliere said, Padrone, he answers to you. Through 3 men, but yes. To you. The Don nodded once. The Don said, find him tonight. Tonight, Frank. Not tomorrow. The consigliere stood up, and left the room without his coat. The nephew started to ask a question, and the Don raised one finger, and the nephew closed his mouth and never asked it. The Don turned back to Rosa. He said, "Daughter of Anna, you will sleep in my house tonight. My wife is dead, but my housekeeper is a good woman, and the bed is clean. Tomorrow we will see about the rest." Rosa shook her head and said, "Senor, I have a cat." The Don almost smiled. He said, "We will get your cat." They did not have to wait long. At 11:30 that night, Frank Pizzo came back through the kitchen door of Marconi's. He had Carmine Falco with him. Carmine Falco was 41 years old, a heavy man with a thin mustache, wearing a track suit and slippers because they had taken him out of his own kitchen. Two soldiers had him by the arms. He was not bleeding. He was not bruised. He was sweating. He was sweating the way a man sweats when he has been told only that the Don wants to see him, and he has not yet been told why. The Don was sitting at the head of the long table again. Rosa was sitting at his right hand. She was wearing the Don's wife's old shawl over her shoulders because the back room had gotten cold. The soldiers brought Carmine to the foot of the table, opposite the Don, opposite Rosa. They let go of his arms. Carmine looked at the Don and tried to smile. He said, "Padrone, what is this?" The Don did not answer. The Don pointed at the floor in front of the table. He said one word. "Kneel." Carmine looked at Rosa. He saw the crutch leaning against the wall. He saw the empty pant leg. He saw the medallion. He understood all at once what room he was in. He knelt. He was a big man, and he knelt badly. His track pants slipped down, and the soldiers did not laugh. The Don said, "This is the daughter of Anna Russo." The Don said, "Do you know who Anna Russo is?" Carmine shook his head. The Don said, "That is part of the problem." The Don said, "Anna Russo pulled my brother Vincenzo out of a burning car in 1963. My family has owed her family a debt for 63 years. You did not know. That is not an excuse. That is a sentence." Carmine started to speak. The Don raised the same finger he had raised at the nephew. Carmine stopped speaking. The Don said, "The husband of this woman owed you $8,000. Is that correct?" Carmine, looking only at the floor, said, "Yes, Padrone." The Don said, "With your points, what was the final number?" Carmine swallowed. Carmine said, 22,000, Padrone." The Don said, 5 points a week. 5. On a fishmonger. On a man with a broken hand who could not work. You did not lend him money, Carmine. You hunted him. The Don's voice was still quiet. That was what made it bad. The Don said, "You will write a check to this woman, tonight in this room, for 220,000. 10 times the debt. Because you collected 10 times too hard. You will write it now. And before you ask, no, you may not pay it over time. You may not pay it in installments. You will write one check, and the check will clear in the morning. And if it does not clear, I will know that too, and we will have this conversation again in a different room with no candles." Frank Pizzo placed a checkbook and a pen on the floor in front of Carmine's knees. Carmine wrote the check. His hand shook. He passed it up. Rosa did not look at it. The Don took it from Carmine's hand and laid it on the white tablecloth next to Rosa's water glass. The Don said, "That is the money part. Now the rest." The Don said, "You killed her husband. You will not kneel here and lie about it." Carmine did not lie. Carmine, on his knees in the back room of Marconi's, said, "Yes, Padrone, I had him killed. He owed me." The Don said, "He owed you 12,000 at the time. You took a life worth more than every dollar in your safe." The Don said, "You will leave this borough. You will leave this state. You will be on a plane to Sicily tomorrow afternoon. You will not return. You will work the rest of your life on the land of my cousin in Corleone for room and board, and you will send Rosa DeLuca half of every dollar you earn until the day you die. If you stop sending, we will know. If you come back to America, we will know. If you tell anyone what happened in this room, we will know. Do you understand? Carmen nodded. The Don said, say it. Carmen said, I understand, Padrone. The Don said one last thing to him. The Don said, you are alive only because she did not ask for your life. If she had asked, you would already be dead, and I would have buried you in concrete tonight without a second thought. Be grateful to her every morning. Be grateful at every meal. Be grateful when you put your head down at night on a straw mattress in my cousin's barn. Be grateful when you wake up the next day and find that the door is not locked, because the door is not locked, but you will not leave, because you know what waits for you in the road. Now get out of my restaurant. The soldiers lifted Carmen off his knees and walked him out the back door. Rosa heard the door close. She heard a car start in the alley. She did not turn her head. She kept looking at the candles on the table and the slow drip of wax onto the white cloth. The Don sat back down beside her. He picked up the check. He folded it twice and put it in the breast pocket of her black coat himself. He patted the pocket once, gently, the way a grandfather pats a grandchild. He said, in the morning, my doctor will come to my house. He is a good doctor. He will measure you for a leg. A real one. The kind that bends at the knee. The kind that lets you climb stairs without counting. Rosa felt her eyes fill up for the first time in 9 months and 4 days. She did not let the tears fall. She nodded once. She said, thank you, senor. The Don said, do not thank me. I am 63 years late. By 6 in the morning, Rosa was asleep in a bed, with clean sheets in the Don's house on Cropsey Avenue. The house was a brick 2-story with a small garden in the back and a stone Madonna near the rose bushes. The Don's housekeeper, a woman named Gina who had worked for the family since before the Don's wife died, ran a hot bath for Rosa and brought her a clean nightgown and turned down the bed. Rosa's cat was in a basket at the foot of that bed. The housekeeper had brought it over in a taxi at 3 in the morning, along with Rosa's pill bottles and her toothbrush and the photograph of Tony from her nightstand. The check was locked in the Don's safe with Rosa's name on the envelope. Carmen Falco was at Kennedy Airport, waiting for an 8 a.m. flight, with a one-way ticket and a small suitcase, and 2 of the Don's men sitting on either side of him. They would not get on the plane. He would. They would watch it take off. A week later, a man from a prosthetics company in Manhattan came to the Don's house with a metal case. He fitted Rosa for a leg. It took 3 visits. The leg cost $11,000, and the Don paid for it out of his own pocket and refused to take $1 of Rosa's check. The leg bent at the knee. It had a soft pad at the top and a black sock and a real shoe. The first time Rosa took a step on 2 legs in over a year, she put her hand on the wall and she breathed in and she breathed out and she did not cry, because she had still not started crying again, but she came close. A month later she moved. The Don had bought her a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a brownstone in Bay Ridge. 2nd floor only. 1 short staircase. She did not need to count anymore. The apartment had a kitchen with a window and a small balcony with 2 pots of basil. There was a brass mezuzah on the doorframe from the previous tenant, and Rosa did not take it down because she liked the way it caught the morning light. The cat liked the balcony. The cat sat in the sun and watched the pigeons. Rosa made coffee in the morning and drank it standing up at the counter on her new leg, and she got used to it. She bought a small radio for the kitchen and listened to opera on Sunday afternoons. She learned to cook for 1 person, which is a different kind of cooking than cooking for 2 and harder than people say. The check from Carmen Falco came every month, in cash, in a brown envelope, slipped under her apartment door before she was awake. She never saw who delivered it. The amount was always different, but it was always there, and it was always at least $400. She kept a small ledger on the kitchen counter and wrote down every envelope and every date in pencil. She gave most of the money to a charity in Tony's name that bought ice and styrofoam for fishmongers who could not afford their own. The rest she saved in a coffee can in the cupboard above the refrigerator. She did not need much. She had her leg and her cat and her balcony and the radio, and the bakery on the corner sold a loaf for $4.75, and she bought one every Saturday and ate it slow. The Don visited her once a month, on the first Sunday. He came in a plain black sedan with one driver and no escort. He never stayed more than an hour. He drank coffee at her small kitchen table and ate 2 slices of toast with butter. He always brought her a small bag from the bakery on 18th Avenue. Not the fancy bakery. The plain one. Bread and a few biscotti, and once a small panettone at Christmas. They did not talk about Tony. They did not talk about Carmen. They did not talk about Anna Russo or burning cars on roads outside Naples. They talked about the basil on the balcony, and the cat, and the weather, and once they talked about a movie the Don had watched on television and not understood. Rosa explained the ending. The Don laughed. He had a quiet laugh. It came out of him like he was a little surprised to find it still in there. He died 3 years later, of a heart attack, in his own kitchen on Cropsey Avenue on a Tuesday morning. The housekeeper found him with his hand on the espresso pot and his cheek against the tile. Rosa went to the funeral on her 2 legs. She wore the same black coat. She sat in the second pew. There were 400 people in that church, and most of them did not know who she was, and the ones who did know did not say. The new Don, who was the Don's nephew, the same nephew who had once called her a cripple, walked her down the steps of the church afterward with his hand under her elbow. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He had learned that night in the back room what kind of room he was in. At the wake he brought her a small plate of food himself, and he stood beside her while she ate it, and he did not let anyone interrupt her. When she was finished, he took the empty plate and he kissed the top of her head once like a son, and then he went back to his new work. Rosa lived another 19 years. The check kept coming every month until the last one, which came 2 weeks after she died, and her sister gave it to the charity in Tony's name. The medallion was buried with Rosa around her neck on the same thin steel chain. The crutch was donated to Veterans Hospital in Queens. The cat outlived her by 6 months and then went asleep on the balcony in the sun and did not wake up. Somebody in the neighborhood, nobody is sure who, put a small brass plaque on the bench outside Marconi's. The plaque said only 3 words. Per la coraggio. For the courage. It is still there. You can go and see it. The bread on her table that first night, the loaf she came for, she never finished eating. She wrapped half of it in a napkin and took it home in her coat pocket. She kept it on her counter for a week, until it went hard, and then she fed it crumb by crumb to the pigeons her cat watched from the balcony. That is the kind of woman Rosa Maria de Luca was. She came for bread. She got a debt paid. She walked home on one leg and never asked anyone for anything again.